As we discussed in last Sunday's video, the 5 staggering secrets to female domination, sometimes when someone says, "I want to serve you," they are really speaking from a place of selfish intent, despite their words. Sometimes, "I want to be your slave," really means, "I want you to put me in chastity and use me as your footstool." That's why today I'm starting a 2-part series designed to help you identify what type of submissive you are or are looking for and how to determine your compatibility with a current or potential dominant. Now, the concept of varying levels of submission is not new. In fact, Diane Vera, in her book Lesbian S&M Safety Manual, lists these 9 types of submissives. But in evaluating her perceived levels, I found the same confusions that many of you in my community, as well as my coaching clients, are coming to me with. You're wrestling with these questions. So I'm going to quickly list Diane's 9 levels with their definitions, but we're actually going to vastly simplify her structure because she essentially illustrates 3 distinct categories across her 9 perceived levels. The non-submissive masochist or kinky sensualist. Not into servitude, humiliation, or giving up control. Just pain and or spiced up sensuality on the masochist's own terms and for the masochist's own direct pleasure. Pseudo-submissive non-slave. Not into even playing slave, but into other submissive role-playing. Usually into humiliation, but not into servitude, even in play. Dictates the scene to a large degree. Pseudo-submissive play slave. Likes to play at being a slave. Likes to feel subservient. May in some cases like to feel one is being used to gratify their partner's sadism. May even really serve the dominant in some ways, but only on the slave's own terms. Dictates the scene to a large degree and often fetishistic. True submissive non-slave. Really gives up control, only temporarily and with agreed upon limits, but gets her or his main satisfaction from aspects of submission other than serving or being used by the dominant. Usually they're turned on by suspense, vulnerability, and or giving up responsibility. They don't dictate the scene except in very general terms, but still seek mainly his or her own direct pleasure, rather than getting one's pleasure mainly from pleasing the dominant. True submissive play slave. Really gives up control, though only temporarily, only during brief scenes and within limits, and gets main satisfaction from serving or being used by the dominant, but only for fun purposes, usually erotic. May not be into pain, if so is turned on by pain indirectly and enjoys being the object of one partner's sadism, on which the submissive places very few requirements or restrictions. Uncommitted short-term but more than play semi-slave. Really gives up control, usually within limits, wants to serve and be used by the dominant, wants to provide practical, non-erotic as well as fun and erotic services, but only when the slave is in the mood. May even act as a full-time slave for, say, several days at a time, but is free to quit at any time or at the end of the agreed-upon several days. May or may not have long-term relationship with one's master or mistress, but either way, the slave has the final say over when he or she will serve. Part-time consensual but real slave. Has an ongoing commitment to an owner-slave relationship and regards oneself as the dominant's property at all times. Wants to obey and please the dominant in all aspects of life, practical, non-erotic, and fun and erotic. Devotes most of their time to commitments, other job, etc., but the dominant has first pick of the slave's free time. Full-time live-in consensual slave. Within no more than a few broad limits or requirements, the slave regards himself or herself existing solely for the dominant's pleasure and well-being. The slave, in turn, expects to be regarded as a prized possession. Not much different from the situation of a traditional housewife, except that within the S&M world, the slave's position is more likely to be fully consensual, especially if the slave is male. And finally, consensual total slave with no limits. This is a common fantasy ideal which probably doesn't exist in real life. according to this author, except in authoritarian religious cults and other situations where the consent is induced by brainwashing and or social or economic pressures and hence isn't fully consensual, aka compliance. What the author was just explaining was the difference between submission and compliance, and I did a video about that just a few weeks ago, so definitely go check that out. But these are good levels, a little confusing, a little redundant, and not very clear in some cases, in my opinion. But what these 9 levels do is provide us with a formula that we can use to discover our kinky personality role and determine our compatibility with a potential partner. So be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, because I'm sharing my secret BDSM formula next Sunday. But for now, let's dig into the 3 main categories illustrated throughout these 9 levels and determine what they mean for you and your dynamic. So the first of the 3 categories I found in these 9 levels was bottom. And this applies to levels 1 through 3 in the former example: the kinky sensualist, the pseudo-sub non-slave, and the pseudo-sub play slave. And with a bottom, their counterpart is a top. And their goal, they really seek sexual and erotic fulfillment. So really, their desire here is fetish-based. They have a fetish-based motivation. And on the other side of the scale, we have slave, and this would apply to levels 7 through 9 in our example: part-time consensual but real slave, full-time live-in consensual slave, and consensual total slave with no limits. Now, a slave's ideal counterpart is a master or owner, and a slave's goal, really, they find pleasure in their master's fulfillment. So we find that their motivation oftentimes is surrender-based, not fetish-based, but surrender-based. So automatically, right off the bat, we see a very stark contrast. But right in the middle, we have submissive, which would fall into levels 4 through 6, the true sub non-slave, the true sub play slave, and the uncommitted short-term but more than play semi-slave. And their ideal counterpart is a dominant, because their goal here is that they seek both sexual and erotic fulfillment as well as their dominant's pleasure. So really, when we have a submissive, we have a service-based motivation, not necessarily a fetish-based motivation, not necessarily full surrender, because you can serve someone without being surrendered to them. Those of you who have bosses, right, that you work for, you serve them on the job, right, but you're not surrendered to them. There's a big difference between service and surrender. So this feels a little bit better, right? This feels a little bit more easy to digest, because these simple but powerful distinctions now allow us to use a chart that I have created that very easily illustrates what subtype would fall into these categories. So as you can see here, based on how we have clearly defined a bottom, submissive, and slave, an alpha sub could be compatible to a top as a bottom and easily serve a dominant. But alpha subs typically do not seek full surrender of their autonomy, thus they would not be compatible with a master as a slave, either part-time or full-time. In the reverse, we see that a slave usually seeks full surrender and mastery, making them compatible with both a master or even a full-time dominant, but they would likely not be fulfilled merely being topped in a sexual scene. And yes, this chart, as well as my entire compatibility system, will be available to download on Patreon next Sunday, September 5th. So just go over to patreon.com/LXerotica to sign up and access all of my exclusive BDSM worksheets and downloads. These 3 categories give us the foundation to what I will be focusing on next Sunday: the formula. Because in addition to these 3 main categories, Diane's 9 levels of submission provides us with a system to discover our BDSM personality, role, and compatibility with another partner. And that's exactly what I will be showing you in next Sunday's video. So be sure you're subscribed to this channel and have notifications turned on so you don't miss it. And as always, feel free to comment below with any questions you would like me to answer in an upcoming video.
Is the camera good?
The camera looks good. Everything looks good. You look good.